You are standing in the baking aisle of the same grocery store your mother shopped at for 30 years. The shelf where the large tins of pure rendered lard used to sit, the ones your grandmother kept next to the stove, has been replaced by 3 different varieties of zero-calorie cooking spray. You check the next aisle. The stone-ground whole-grain cornmeal in the paper bag is gone. There is a plastic container now. Different weight, different color, different smell when you open it. You are not misremembering. 10 products that fed, preserved, and protected American, British, Canadian, and Australian households for over 100 years are walking off the shelves right now. Quietly, without announcements, without recalls, without anyone asking your permission. And most of them will not exist in any store, in any form, by this time next year. My name's not important right now. What is important is that I spent the last 2 years doing something most people stopped doing a long time ago. I talked to old people. I sat in farmhouse kitchens in rural Virginia and listened. I visited a 4th-generation general store in a small town in Vermont that still stocks products nobody else carries. I read through county agricultural bulletins from the 1940s that have never been digitized. I found a handwritten household ledger from a homesteader in Manitoba dating back to 1921. And what I found inside all of those places told me something I could not ignore. The products disappearing from your store shelves are not being replaced by something better. They are being replaced by something more profitable. Those are not the same thing. Stay with me until the end of this video because I am going to show you 2 things. First, exactly which 10 products are disappearing and why that actually matters for your household. Second, a 1942 agricultural circular from the USDA that lists the homemade alternatives that rural families used before every one of these products existed commercially. Every single alternative on that list can be sourced or made this weekend. No licenses, no equipment, no contractors. Let us start. The first product is something your great-grandmother kept in a ceramic crock on the counter, and your grandmother kept in a tin in the refrigerator. Pure rendered lard. Real pork fat, slow-cooked, and strained. Not hydrogenated. Not whipped with vegetable oil. Not stabilized with preservatives. The large containers, the ones rural families bought by the 5-pound tin, have been disappearing from mainstream grocery stores since the mid-2000s. What replaced them are shortening products and cooking sprays that share almost nothing in common with real lard, except the shelf they occupy. In 2020, a food science team at the University of Minnesota published findings comparing the smoke points and oxidation rates of traditional rendered lard versus modern vegetable shortening under high cooking temperatures. Real lard outperformed the modern alternative in stability, smoke point consistency, and the retention of its fat structure after repeated heating cycles. Your grandmother's pie crust was not better because she was a better baker. It was better because the fat she was using behaved differently at the molecular level than anything currently sitting on that shelf. I spoke with a woman named Margaret, 82 years old, who runs a small farm in central Pennsylvania. She still renders her own lard every November from the pigs her son raises. She told me she tried buying commercial lard from the grocery store once, about 15 years ago, when she had a bad season. She said it smelled wrong from the moment she opened the container, and her biscuits came out flat. She has not bought commercial lard since. The last major regional lard producer in the mid-Atlantic United States scaled back operations in 2022. Small specialty suppliers still exist, but the window is closing. The second product, Vanishing, is one that stocked the pantry shelves of every serious household from the 1920s through the 1980s. Full fat, whole cream powdered milk. Not the low-fat version, not the skim version, the real version, with the fat intact. That reconstitutes into something close to actual whole milk in stores for years, without refrigeration. The regulatory pressure on full-fat dairy products pushed most manufacturers toward the low-fat and non-fat powdered milk versions. Throughout the 1990s, the full-fat version became a specialty item, then a niche item, then an item that most mainstream retailers stopped carrying entirely. A 2021 shelf availability study, conducted by a preparedness research group, tracked full cream powdered milk across 300 major retail outlets in the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. Availability had dropped by 61% compared to 2011 figures. In rural Australia, homesteading families used full cream powdered milk to feed orphaned livestock, to make cheese, and to stretch their grocery budgets through drought seasons. The women I read about in a 1943 Queensland agricultural bulletin were doing things with a tin of whole milk powder that would take 3 modern products to replicate. The low-fat version sitting on your shelf today is not an equivalent. It is a compromise that became a standard because the standard disappeared. The third product is one that orchard growers and market gardeners across the English-speaking world used for over a century to protect their crops without synthetic chemistry. Copper sulfate crystals. Bright blue. sold in fabric bags at every farm supply store in America until about 15 years ago. Mixed with hydrated lime and water, it becomes what European farmers call Bordeaux mixture, a fungal treatment so effective that it is still the only approved treatment for certain crop diseases, under certified organic standards in both the United States and the European Union. The problem is finding the raw crystals. Garden centers replace them with pre-mixed sprays. Farm supply stores replace them with synthetic fungicide concentrates. The crystal form, the one you could dissolve yourself in the ratios that suited your specific soil and crop, has been reduced to a specialty order item that most people do not know to look for. A 2018 extension report from Cornell University's agricultural program noted that traditional Bordeaux mixture applications on heritage apple varieties in upstate New York produced measurable reductions in fire blight and apple scab with zero soil toxicity residue after the growing season. The premixed synthetic alternative they compared it against left detectable soil residue for an average of 14 months. The old farmers who grew heritage orchards in Vermont, in British Columbia, in rural New South Wales, they knew copper sulfate. They kept it in a locked barn cabinet, in a paper bag next to a handwritten mixing chart. That paper bag is being discontinued. The fourth product hits the craftspeople, the furniture restorers, and anyone who has ever tried to repaint an old piece of American colonial furniture and watched 3 coats of modern paint peel away in under 2 years. Traditional milk paint. Dry pigment powder made from casein, the protein in milk, mixed with natural earth pigments, and lime, not the premixed version in the plastic bottle. The dry powder you mix yourself, in the ratio you choose, with the pigment strength you decide. The powder form allows complete control over the finish. It bonds to raw wood at a depth that modern latex paint cannot reach. When it cures on a piece of properly prepared pine or maple, it does not sit on the surface of the wood. It becomes part of it. A furniture conservator I contacted who works with museum collections in the Mid-Atlantic region told me, and I am paraphrasing closely here, that she has examined colonial-era pieces, painted with milk paint in the 1700s, that show better adhesion than pieces, repainted with modern latex in the 1990s, 2 centuries versus 30 years. The dry powder form has almost completely disappeared from mainstream retailers. One manufacturer in Maine still produces it. A small operation in the UK still imports the base casein, but the distribution has collapsed, and most of the hardware stores that carried the powder form stopped ordering it when the pre-mixed liquid version arrived. The liquid version has a shelf life of 7 days after mixing. The dry powder form, stored in a sealed tin, lasts indefinitely. The 5th product is one that medical textbooks from the 1800s through the 1970s listed under emergency household estimates: food grade, activated charcoal made from hardwood, oak, hickory, maple, not the compressed petroleum charcoal briquettes for your backyard grill. Not the capsule supplements from the health store. The loose powder, made from pure hardwood, that rural households kept in the pantry alongside the vinegar and the baking soda. Physicians documented its use for digestive emergencies, for water purification, and as a drawing agent for minor skin infections throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. The 1899 edition of a standard household medical reference recommended it specifically for farm families living beyond the reach of a doctor. The large format food-grade hardwood version has nearly vanished from retail entirely. What you find now is either the grill product, which is not food-grade, or the supplement capsule, which is food-grade but comes in a bottle of 60 capsules at a price point designed for occasional use, not household stockpiling. A homesteader in rural Montana I read about in a preparedness community had sourced 20 pounds of vitch from a specialty supplier in 2019. She wrote about using it to filter a compromised well during a flooding event that year. By the time she went back to order more in 2021, the supplier had stopped production. The product still works exactly as well as it did in 1899. The market for it has simply been carved into specialty segments too small for any single supplier to consider worth producing. This is the one that'll surprise you the most. Fermented cod liver oil, the old kind, cold processed and unrefined, was a staple in Northern European and North American households from the 1800s through the 1960s. Every fishing community in Norway, Newfoundland, and Scotland gave it to children. Through the winter, every farm family in the Canadian prairies kept a bottle in the medicine cabinet. It is not the same product as the refined, heat-processed cod liver oil in the orange-flavored softgel capsule on your pharmacy shelf today. The fermentation process that traditional producers used preserved a complex of fat-soluble vitamins and omega compounds that researchers at the Weston A. Price Foundation have documented extensively, noting that the heat refining process used in modern production destroys certain nutrient profiles that the cold fermented version retains. There is now exactly one commercial producer in the United States still making the cold fermented version, using traditional methods. 1. When the last person in that operation retires, or the economics stop working, that specific product, unchanged since the 1800s, disappears permanently from the commercial market. The fishing communities of the Lofoten Islands in Norway documented their production methods and records going back to the 1100s, 800 years of continuous production. And the commercial version of it is, right now, down to a single American producer. Product 7 sounds like a small thing until you realize how many things it holds together. Untreated food-grade, natural fiber twine, jute, or hemp. The kind your grandmother tied around the butcher paper on a roast before it went in the oven. The kind market gardeners used to stake tomatoes without worrying about plastic chemicals leaching into soil that would grow next year's food. The food-grade, untreated version, the kind with no synthetic coating, no dye, no chemical treatment, has become nearly impossible to find at a standard grocery store or garden center. What replaced it is polypropylene synthetic twine in every weight and color imaginable. And it does the job well enough that most people stopped noticing when the natural version disappeared. But the natural version was compostable. It broke down in soil. It did not add microplastic fragments to vegetable gardens or get into groundwater. And for certain traditional food preparations, trussing, poultry, wrapping, aged cheese, tying herd bundles for drying, the synthetic alternative is not a food-safe substitute. A market gardener in Vermont wrote about this on a small farming blog in 2022, tracking 3 years of searching for untreated food-grade jute twine locally before giving up and ordering direct from a single importer, still bringing it in from Bangladesh. She noted that the importer told her the quantity she was asking, about 5 pounds, was larger than any single order they had processed in the previous year. The 8th product is one of the oldest foods in North American history, and the real version of it has almost completely vanished from the modern food supply. Water-ground stone-milled whole-grain cornmeal, made from heritage corn varieties Bloody Butcher, Jimmy Red, Glass Gem, using granite millstones and water power at small regional mills. Not the degerminated, shelf-stable yellow cornmeal in the blue cardboard box. That product has had its germ and bran removed specifically to extend shelf life. It reconstitutes cleanly into a smooth texture. It also contains a fraction of the nutritional content and none of the complex flavor of the whole grain version. A grain scientist at North Carolina State University published research in 2019 comparing the nutritional profiles of heritage whole grain water-ground cornmeal against standard commercial degerminated cornmeal. The heritage product contained measurably higher concentrations of magnesium, zinc, and natural vitamin E compounds. The water-ground product spoils in weeks. That is why it disappeared from commercial shelves. Not because it was worse. Because it could not survive the supply chain. There are fewer than 40 water-powered grist mills still operating commercially in the entire United States. In 1840, there were over 20,000. The last time a family in rural Georgia could drive 30 minutes and buy freshly ground whole grain cornmeal from the mill their great-grandparents used was probably sometime in the late 1970s for most rural communities. The 9th product is one that lit every home in the English-speaking world for 200 years before the petroleum industry arrived. Tallow candles. Pure rendered beef fat, poured in a mold around a cotton wick. No additives, no fragrance, no paraffin. They burn differently from paraffin candles. Cooler, slower. The light they produce sits at a different point on the color spectrum. Warmer, softer, closer to natural firelight. And here's the practical reason this matters right now, beyond nostalgia. Paraffin candles are a petroleum byproduct. The supply and price of paraffin is tied directly to oil refining. Tallow is a byproduct of the beef supply chain that has existed on this continent since European settlement. Your butcher has suet. Almost every local butcher has suet, and most of them can barely give it away. Because the market for rendered tallow in mainstream cooking and candle making has almost completely collapsed. A candle maker in rural Ontario I found through a traditional crafts registry told me she sells maybe 2 dozen pure tallow candles a month. Her customers are almost entirely over the age of 65. When I asked her what happens to her stock when she stops making them, she was quiet for a moment. She said she did not know who would make them after her. The commercial candle industry is paraffin, soy, and synthetic fragrance. The old product that every settler household depended on has become an artisan curiosity. The 10th product, and the one that genuinely stopped me when I found the documentation, is pickling lime, not the fruit, the mineral compound. Calcium hydroxide, slaked lime. For over a century, it was used across the American South and throughout rural Mexico and Central America for a process called nixtamalization, soaking dried corn in a lime solution before grinding it into masa or grits. That single step transforms corn from a food with limited nutritional availability into a food that releases its full niacin content for human digestion. The populations that did not nixtamalize their corn, specifically the populations that adopted corn as a staple crop in the 1700s without adopting the preparation method, developed widespread deficiency diseases within 2 generations. The southern United States saw epidemic level pellagra cases through the early 1900s because the corn was being eaten without the lime process. A 2016 review published in the Journal of Food Chemistry traced the entire historical pathway of this knowledge and its partial loss during industrialization, and the physical product, food grade calcium hydroxide, in the quantities a household needs to actually do this, has been quietly restricted, reformulated, and pulled from retail shelves in several states over the past 8 years. The reason given is safety around chemical handling. The practical effect is that a preparation method that fed populations for thousands of years and demonstrably prevented nutritional deficiency disease requires, in 2024, a specialty order from an online supplier and about 2 weeks of shipping time. When those suppliers stop carrying it, the knowledge becomes theoretical. It sits in books. It does not sit in anyone's kitchen. I want to tell you about the 1942 USDA document now. It is called Agriculture Information Bulletin Circular 718, titled Home Production of Household Staples During Wartime Shortages, revised from a 1938 precursor. I found a physical copy at a regional agricultural archive in upstate New York, where it had been filed under wartime homesteading resources, and not touched in what the archivist estimated was 25 years. It contains preparation guides for 11 of the exact categories of products on this list. The tallow candle instructions are on page 34. The lime water grain treatment method is on page 61. The copper sulfate mixing ratios for a home garden are on page 89, with specific notes on lime ratios for different soil pH levels. It was written for the average American householder, not a chemist, not a farmer. Someone with a kitchen, a backyard, and a reason to be self-sufficient, because the shelves in 1942 were not reliable either. The document is in the public domain. I found it in a physical archive because it has never been digitized and listed in any searchable database I could find. I am working on making my scanned copy available, and I will leave the archive information in the description below so anyone who wants to request it can contact them directly. The knowledge in it is not gone. It is just sitting in a filing cabinet in a building most people do not know exists. I want to say one more thing before I close this video because I think it is important to say plainly. Every product on this list disappeared from mainstream retail for the same reason. Not because it stopped working. Not because something genuinely better replaced it. But because the product worked too well, lasted too long, could be made or sourced independently, and served too many functions in a household that was otherwise profitable to supply separately. A single tin of real, rendered lard. There's 12 things that 12 different modern cooking products each do once. A bag of whole copper sulfate crystals treats an orchard for a season at a fraction of the cost of 12 applications of a proprietary branded spray. A pound of genuine milk paint powder, mixed at home, finishes a piece of furniture that outlasts the person who painted it. When a single product replaces 12 sales, someone loses 12 sales. That is not a conspiracy. That is arithmetic. And the arithmetic has been running against traditional household knowledge for 70 years. I want to tell you about a man named Clarence. I met him at an estate auction in rural Kentucky in the spring of last year. He was 84. He had driven himself 3 hours to attend the auction because the family selling the estate had advertised, in a small classified notice, that there was a complete set of stone-ground mill equipment in the barn. He was not there to buy it. He had his own. He was there because he had heard that the family had no one who knew what it was for, and he wanted to talk to whoever bought it and make sure they understood what they had. The mill sold to an antique dealer from Nashville, who wanted it for a restaurant lobby installation. Clarence stood in that barn for a moment after the hammer fell. Then he looked at me. I was the only person who had walked over to look at the mill closely, and he said something I have not stopped thinking about. He said, "The machine is not the hard part. The machine you can find. What goes away is knowing what to do with it." He drove 3 hours to say that to whoever would listen. I am saying it to you now. Tell me in the comments, which of these 10 products you remember from a parent or grandparent's home. Tell me if you have a grandmother who used pickling lime, or a grandfather who kept tallow candles in the garage. Tell me if you have ever tasted water ground, cornmeal, or seen a real copper sulfate mix used in a garden. Those stories are not just memories. They are the preservation of working knowledge that no database has fully captured. This community has become, without quite planning it, one of the most concentrated archives of practical household history being assembled in real time. Every story in the comments below adds something that might otherwise disappear. If this video showed you something worth saving, subscribe and stay close. Because next week I am opening that 1942 agricultural circular on camera, page by page, and walking through the 5 most practical formulas in it that any household can replicate this season. One of them is a wooden fabric preservative that the document claims will remain effective for 30 years on untreated external timber. I tested it on a fence post in October. Come back next week and I will show you what it looks like now.